We play What If when it comes to former LA Kings players still playing in the NHL for other teams. Which players are the Kings just fine without, and which do we regret letting go? That and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. On today's episode, we're going to check in on all of the former LA Kings players who are currently slated to be in the starting lineup for another NHL team this upcoming season. What were the circumstances under which they left us? Would the Kings be just fine without them, or is there some real regret they're no longer in LA? Do want to give a shout out and say thank you to @EbenHadFeelings on X. He is the one who floated this as an idea for a show. And obviously, I thought it was a good idea. We're going to give it a try, and hopefully you find it informative and entertaining. And if you have an idea for a show or a segment or a topic or somebody we should interview, I am more than happy to take your suggestions. I can't guarantee you that I'll use your idea, but I would be more than happy to get those suggestions. The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. Okay, so I counted 25 players currently in the NHL that have played at least one game for the LA Kings. All of them have been more than one game, but I used the depth chart from the website puckpedia.com for the upcoming season to determine if these players are going to be in the starting lineup for their teams or not. So we will start in our first segment here with the forward list. And are there any former Kings players who are playing or scheduled to play on their team's top line for this coming season? There is one, and his name is Gabe Vilardi. Currently with the Winnipeg Jets, he is slated to play on their right wing on their top line. He was the 11th overall pick by the LA Kings in the first round of 2017. And at the time, he was projected to be a top six forward in the NHL. Of course, he was a part of the infamous trade for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Last season, Vilardi, who had some concerns when he was with the Kings, he had some concerns about his reliability as far as his ability to stay healthy, always seemed to be kind of nicked up. Well, he played all 82 games for the Jets last season. First time in his NHL career he did that, and probably not a surprise. He set career highs with 30 goals and 69 points. Now, had he stayed in LA, he would probably be moving to center this year. Wouldn't be Adrian Kempe or possibly Alex Laferriere. Vilardi was drafted as a center. He has been playing wing at the NHL, kind of in the mold of an Adrian Kempe. But I think that if he were somehow still on the Kings, if the Kings decided not to make the PLD trade, I think Gabe Vilardi and Quinton Byfield are our top two centers going into next season. And 26 years old for Gabe Vilardi. I would say Q and Vilardi as our top two centers for the next, theoretically, 10 years with their ages would potentially be a very nice thing. Now, Vilardi's signed for the next 5 years, makes $7.5 million per season. It's a very reasonable price for a top six forward. So looking back on it, hard not to think that Rob Blake, when it was all said and done, should have just kept Gabe Vilardi, and the Kings would probably be in a better position now than they are otherwise. Now, I didn't really care for the trade at the time. It wasn't like I thought Gabe Vilardi was a guy that was untradeable. And I do like my general managers, generally speaking, to not be afraid to make bold moves. I just didn't like the player in question in Pierre-Luc Dubois coming back to LA. Just thought he had too many question marks around him going forward. There are 3 players in the NHL for next season playing for other teams that are former Kings who are slated to play on their team's second line, and one of them is Pierre-Luc Dubois with the Washington Capitals. He's center. He is going to play. He is slated to center, is what I wanted to say, the Washington Capitals' second line next season. Now, his brief time in Washington has been a bit of a mixed bag. First season, he played all 82 games and had a respectable 20 goals and 66 points. The Capitals were very happy with his two-way game as well. But last year, he only played 29 games due to injury, And as much as he didn't seem to be a fit in LA, it's also hard not to wonder, after the Kings did make the trade for him, had they just held on to him, probably kept Quinton Byfield on the wing, would the Kings be better off now than they are if they would have had Quinton Byfield and Pierre-Luc Dubois as their two centers? You could argue that would be a better situation. But the thing is, Pierre-Luc Dubois hasn't shown he can stay healthy. Now, when he is healthy, he's a decent two-way center, but he's not always healthy, and he's not reliable, and he's also making $8.5 million per season for the next 5 years. Now, for a top six center, that's not, a huge overpayment necessarily, but for a guy who's unreliable and can't stay in the lineup, it probably is. So I would say trading Pierre-Luc Dubois, ultimately, even though the Kings could use him right now as one of their top six centers, I think it was the right thing to do. He just wasn't a fit here. Again, I'm not a believer in him staying healthy. I think the Kings are better off without Pierre-Luc Dubois on the team. The two other players that are slated to be on their team's second line this year are a couple of veteran wingers. Victor Arvidsson, now with the Detroit Red Wings, 33-year-old, had a decent season last year with 25 goals and 54 points in Boston. He's another guy who has had his injury issues over the years. He hasn't played more than 70 games in a season since 2022-23. The Kings let him walk as a free agent in 2023-24. He's now on his third team in 3 years. He's a decent veteran. I think if he were still with the LA Kings, he'd probably be on the Kings' third line on the wing. He signed for 2 years at $5 million per season. I mean, it's a decent price for a second line winger, but like I said, I don't really think on the Kings he would be a second line winger. So I think the Kings are just fine without Victor Arvidsson. Always liked how scrappy he was, though. Just a good all around player, though, good veteran player. And the other guy is Brayden Schenn, now with the New York Islanders. He was the 5th overall pick of the Kings in 2009. I remember there was a lot of talk about him being a future captain in the NHL, and he would turn out to be one, although it wasn't with the Kings. He was traded to the Philadelphia Flyers back in 2012, along with Wayne Simmons and the Mike Richards deal. Obviously, Richards helped the Kings win 2 Stanley Cups, so no regret on that trade whatsoever. As for Brayden Schenn, he's about to turn 35 years old. He's played over 1,000 NHL games. Mentioned he was a captain for a while with the St. Louis Blues, won a cup there. Good leader, physical guy. His production is, I don't think he's a top 6 player anymore. In 80 games last year, he had 18 goals and 39 points. I would see him, like Arvidsson, as a third-line winger if he were still somehow on the LA Kings. There are 6 players that are slated to play on the third line for their teams this upcoming season. One of them is Tyler Toffoli. He and Drew Doughty, the only active NHL players that are still from the 2014 Kings Stanley Cup winning team. Toffoli, now 34 years old, slated to play on the third line on the wing for the San Jose Sharks. And that's Tyler Toffoli is a very good third line winger in the NHL. But I think if he were still on the LA Kings, he'd be a third line winger as well. He'd be behind Artemi Panarin. He'd be behind Kevin Fiala on the left side. Toffoli, 79 games last season, had 19 goals and 49 points. Still a pretty good player. And I was an advocate of the Kings signing him as a free agent a couple of years ago before he ultimately decided to sign in San Jose. The Kings traded Toffoli as a part of their retool back in 2020. The Kings got in return Tim Schaller and Tyler Madden, a couple of players who never played in the NHL. And they also got a couple of draft picks that did turn into Brock Faber and Kenny Connors. So in the end, understandable, the Tyler Toffoli trade. And I think the Kings are okay without Toffoli with them. You also have Phillip Danault, now with the Montreal Canadiens. He is slated to be the Habs' third-line center. I've been pretty transparent on my disappointment with Phillip Danault on what I think quitting on the LA Kings last season. I think Scott Laughton is a very comparable player. He's a year younger. He's signed for a couple more seasons, and he's getting paid less than what Phillip Danault is getting paid in Montreal. So I think overall, Kings are just fine without Phillip Danault. Warren Foegele is with the Ottawa Senators now, and I like Foegele. He wasn't only in LA for a season, a season plus, and also really puzzled why he wanted out of LA as well. I'm not as disgusted with Foegele as I was with Danault, because Danault was here longer. He was considered a team leader. He wore a letter on his sweater. So I think the Kings are fine without Warren Fogle as well. You've also got Alex Iafallo now with the Winnipeg Jets. He was a part of the Pierre-Luc Dubois deal. Michael Amadio, former King, now playing with the Ottawa Senators. And Andrei Kuzmenko, slated to play on the third line for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think the Kings are just fine without any of those guys. Several fourth-line players for their former Kings are in the league. 5 of them. You've got Blake Lizotte in Pittsburgh. He is slated to be the Penguins' fourth-line center. Always a scrappy, hardworking player, and has continued to be that in Pittsburgh as well. Jeff Malott left the Kings this offseason to join the Anaheim Ducks. I think the Kings will miss his physicality, but fourth-line players are fairly expendable. You got Tanner Jeannot in Boston. Remember, he asked out of LA as well. He wanted a bigger role on another team, and he's playing on the fourth line in Boston, so he hasn't exactly got what he wanted when he left LA. Nick Dowd plays for the Vegas Golden Knights. He was a part of a really bad trade for the Kings. The Kings sent Dowd to Vancouver for Jordan Subban. Subban never played an NHL game, and Dowd has played almost 700 NHL games. So that was a very poor move by the Kings at the time. Not an impactful move in terms of letting a very, very impactful player go, but a solid NHL player that they didn't apparently think was an NHL player, and they were wrong. One other player to mention, Zach McEwen. He is a former Kings draft pick. He's with the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's kind of slated to be an extra forward for them. May or may not be in the starting lineup. If he is, he's a fourth-line guy. But I think the Kings are just fine without any of those players still on their roster. Fourth-line players, as important as they can be, are also pretty replaceable and expendable as well. Up next, we're going to look at former LA Kings defensemen that would still look very good wearing LA Kings sweaters. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Locked On LA Kings is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick on who you think will hit a home run in their next game. And if you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep, and now you get a chance to make your prediction before the first pitch. Sometimes it's a hitter who's been on a hot streak. Maybe there's a favorable pitching matchup or even a ballpark that gives up a lot of homers. That's the first thing I look for before making my daily dingers selection. So are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who is hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we are continuing to look at former LA Kings players that are now playing elsewhere in the NHL and whether the Kings have regret that these players are no longer on their team. And I think that is the case for several defensemen. There are 3 players slated to be on their team's top pairing in the NHL, including Vladislav Gavrikov, now of the New York Rangers, another player that the Kings unfortunately let walk for nothing. I don't know if Gavrikov misled the Kings into thinking he was going to re-sign. I know I certainly thought that was going to be the case. Either way, the Kings needed to either re-sign or trade Gavrikov. They cannot afford to let him walk for nothing, even as well as he was playing in his final season in LA in place of the injured Drew Doughty. Certainly the Kings could use a Vladislav Gavrikov on their blue line on the left side right now. There's been smoke about him not being happy in New York, and there's been rumors about him maybe wanting to come back to LA. Obviously, that hasn't happened so far, but that's out there. It would be very, maybe he's having regret that he decided to leave the LA Kings. But Vladislav Gavrikov is a player. The Kings are certainly sad he's no longer with them, and certainly sad the circumstances that he left. But the Kings didn't learn their lesson from another defenseman who is playing on a top pairing in the league, and that's Matt Roy for the Washington Capitals. The Kings let him walk for nothing after the 2023-24 season, and they didn't learn their lesson on another player they should not have let go for getting nothing in return. he would definitely fit with the LA Kings right now. Now he is 31 years old. It would have been interesting had he stayed an LA King, how that would have worked with Brandt Clarke and Drew Doughty. Maybe, Matt Roy wasn't a third pairing guy, but maybe circumstances would have kept him on the third pairing. Maybe him seeing a Brandt Clarke and a Drew Doughty slated to play in front of him, maybe he would want a bigger role, and would have left the Kings as a free agent. But again, the Kings did a poor job of letting him go for nothing. He's turned into a very, very good player for the Washington Capitals. And Brayden McNabb with the Vegas Golden Knights, reliable veteran, physical, steady. He'd look great on the left side for the LA Kings these days. I'd certainly prefer him over Joel Edmondson and Brian Dumoulin, even though at 35, he's a little bit older than both those guys. And he doesn't give you much offense just like those guys either, but he gives you a lot of other things that they don't do all that well, in my opinion. The Kings traded McNabb to the Buffalo Sabres in a deal for Hudson Fasching and Nick Delorier. I should say they got McNabb from Buffalo for Hudson Fasching and Nick Delorier. McNabb has been far and away the best player from that group. So that was a good trade to get Brayden McNabb to the LA Kings. Unfortunately, the Kings had to leave him exposed in the expansion draft for Vegas in 2017, and he's been a Golden Knight ever since and won a cup with them. So those are all three forwards that would still look pretty good in an LA Kings uniform. There are three players that are slated to be on the second pairing defensively for teams across the NHL, and one of them is Scott Walker of the Carolina Hurricanes, a very solid right shot defenseman. Kings traded him to make up for a mistake. What was the mistake? It was signing Cal Peterson to a contract, and it turns out Cal Peterson wasn't an NHL caliber goaltender. They wanted to get rid of his contract. The Philadelphia Flyers said, we'll take him, but you also have to sweeten it for us. And that meant they gave up Sean Walker along with a prospect and a draft pick as well. A very costly move for the Kings, but they felt they had to do it at the time. Like Matt Roy, Sean Walker probably would have been a third pairing guy behind Brandt Clarke and Drew Doughty for a couple seasons. I would say now, if Matt Roy and Sean Walker, right shot D-men, were still with the Kings, I'd have them on the second pairing and Drew Doughty on the third with Brandt Clarke on the first pairing. And they would both be really reliable players for sure. For Sean Walker, it certainly has worked out for him. He left Philadelphia. Eventually, he signed a big deal with Carolina, and he was a part of a Stanley Cup winning team this past season for the Hurricanes and played a very key role for them in that. Sean Durzi is now with the New York Rangers, another right shot defenseman. How many right shot defensemen did at one time the Kings have in their system? So many. You can understand why some of them were traded away because they had so many, but man, how would some of these guys look now with the Kings, especially with the Cody Ceci situation? But Sean Durzi would be one of those guys. Now, I was never as high as some Kings fans seem to be on him. He ended up getting, though, traded for a second-round pick. The Kings then used that second-round pick in the Pierre-Luc Dubois deal. So another player that the Kings had that provided some good depth that they ended up trading and really didn't get anything in return. I mean, they got Pierre-Luc Dubois, but that package in return ended up being obviously something that did not work out. And Jordan Spence, now with the Ottawa Senators, certainly would love for him to still be with the Kings on their third pairing. You know, it's probably one of the worst moves Ken Holland has made when you look at the combination of trading away Spence and then bringing in Cody Ceci and then signing Ceci to that contract and then seeing Jordan Spence blossom into a reliable NHL defender. You remember Spence wanted to play. The Kings had told him you'd be the extra defenseman. You wouldn't be in the lineup because Cody Ceci is going to be in the lineup over you. And he said, well, I want to go somewhere else. And you can't blame him for that. It's worked out well for Ottawa. It has not worked out well for the LA Kings. So another right shot defenseman that the Kings traded away and now are in a situation where they could have used any of these guys on the right side instead of Cody Ceci. There are two defensemen who are slated to be on the third pairing for teams across the NHL. A couple of real veteran guys. Oli Mata is with the Minnesota Wild. I was shocked when I saw he's only 31 years old. Seems like he's been in the league forever. He's on his sixth NHL team now. He played 2 seasons for the Kings. He was an okay player for the Kings, but again, he's a third pairing guy. You know, would I take him over a Brian Dumoulin? probably considering that he makes less money and is younger than Brian Dumoulin. Yeah, but he's also not a guy that I have much regret that is no longer with the LA Kings. Same goes for Luke Schenn, who's 36 years old and is now on his 10th NHL team with the Vancouver Canucks. Only played one season in LA from 2015. It was the 2015-2016 season. I'm not completely sure how this guy keeps getting jobs, but he does. I'm okay with him not being on the Kings anymore. But would I rather have Luke Schenn over Cody Ceci? I would, because I don't think his level of play is much worse. He costs $2 million less, and you can get rid of him after the season. He signed on a 1-year deal. All right, up next, some former Kings goalies to talk about, as well as some former Kings players that LA drafted but never ended up playing a game in a Kings uniform. That is next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. All right, we're wrapping up our look at former LA Kings players who are still in the NHL, now playing for other teams. There are 2 goalies out there that are now on other teams that are former Kings. We'll start with Joonas Korpisalo, very briefly a King. He's now the backup in New York with the Rangers behind Igor Shesterkin. Only played 11 games for the Kings and then a couple of playoff games. Remember, he came over in the Jonathan Quick trade. Vladislav Gavrikov was really the big addition at that time. Although I think the Kings did look at Korpisalo as a potential replacement for Quick. Unfortunately, they were not able to re-sign him after the season, and he ends up leaving for nothing. Would I rather have Joonas Korpisalo as the Kings' number 2 goalie in compared to Anton Forsberg? I think it's pretty even. Forsberg is making a little bit more money. I think Korpisalo and Forsberg are fairly comparable goaltenders, so there's an argument to be made. Maybe you'd prefer Korpisalo over Forsberg, but it's not a real strong argument, really. The other goalie that used to play for the Kings, now kicking around the NHL, is big save David Rittich. He's now the number 2 goaltender of the New Jersey Devils behind Jake Allen. Played a couple of okay seasons with the LA Kings, but would I take him over Anton Forsberg right now? I'd probably say no. I think Forsberg's probably a little bit better. And if we do have a situation where it's going to be, remember we had Ed Brea with that intel he claims from Peter Laviolette, where he said he was going to platoon the 2 goalies, or at least to start the season. I think I'd feel more comfortable with an Anton Forsberg and a Darcy Kemper than I would an Darcy Kemper and a David Rittich. So I would say Kings are okay without David Rittich on the team anymore. There are some former Kings draft picks that never played a game for the LA Kings that are currently playing in the NHL. The most notable one is Brock Faber. He was a second-round pick of the Kings in 2020, never played for the Kings, never played in the Kings organization, ended up being a part of the Kevin Fiala trade, and is now playing on the top pairing for the Minnesota Wild. A lot of people think the Kings should be remorseful about this deal. I'm not one of them. Again, at the time, the Kings had Brandt Clarke and Brock Faber. I think realistically, you're only going to play one of those guys as your top pairing defenseman on the right side. They figured they could get what was necessary at the time in a high-scoring winger in Kevin Fiala. And even though the Kings have a bit of a surplus at the wing and are in need on defense, I still don't have any regret about this trade. I would certainly say having Brandt Clarke and Brock Faber as your 1-2 punch on the right side for the next 10 years, pretty appealing. But when it's all said and done, again, I know why the Kings made the deal at the time. It made sense at the time. And again, if you have Brock Faber, is he going to be the number 1 defenseman over Brandt Clarke? I think they're pretty comparable. Some might disagree. Yeah, Faber's accomplished a little bit more in his brief NHL career than Clarke has to this point. I think Brandt Clarke, though, can turn into a Brock Faber with more offensive upside if things work out the way we want, with Clarke getting more ice time and playing under a more offensive-minded coach in Peter Laviolette. Erik Cernak, to me, was a much more story where you shake your head than Brock Faber. Erik Cernak was a second-round pick of the Kings in 2015. He's going to play on the second pairing with the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was traded in 2017 for Ben Bishop, the goaltender. Bishop went on to play a whopping 7 games for the Kings. Erik Chernak has played 502 and counting for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Another right shot defenseman the Kings could have on their roster right now. That was a bad trade. Very bad trade by the LA Kings. Nick Delorier was a Kings draft pick, 3rd round in 2009. He is slated to be on the 4th line at best for the Carolina Hurricanes. I did mention before he was a part of that trade for Brayden McNabb back in the day. That was a good deal for LA. I don't think any regrets in trading away Nick Delorier. Also, Mikey Isamont plays for the Boston Bruins. He was a 5th-round pick of the Kings in 2016. He's slated to also be a 4th-line player for the Boston Bruins, maybe an extra forward as well. Never played a game for the Kings. They allowed him to walk as a free agent. They didn't think he was an NHL player, but he has gone on to play 269 NHL games for 5 different teams. So certainly not a star, but a guy who has some value being an extra defenseman in the NHL. And Jake Middleton was a 7th-round pick of the Kings in 2014. He is slated to play on the 3rd pairing this year for the Calgary Flames. The Kings never signed him after drafting him in the 7th round. He ended up signing as a free agent with the San Jose Sharks, and he has gone on to play 381 games in the NHL. So another miscalculation. The Kings did not think he was an NHL player, but he has turned out to be a decent NHL player. So in conclusion, I would say the Kings have been okay in their decision as far as some of the forwards they have parted ways with. I do think the exception would be Gabe Vilardi and the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. That was a trade that ultimately did not work and probably should have never happened. But I think as far as the other forwards the Kings have let go that are still on NHL rosters, not too much regret otherwise. Can't say the same for the defense. As I mentioned, so many good former defensemen that are ex-LA Kings that are now playing very significant roles for other teams in the NHL, and the Kings could use a lot of those guys. I think if there's one that you really have the regret on, I mean, the Vladislav Gavrikov thing, certainly you'd love to still have him on the left side. But I think Jordan Spence, to me, is the one you really look on. You wouldn't have Cody Ceci, you wouldn't have that contract, and you would have a better, younger player who would have been very content to play on your 3rd line behind Drew Doughty and Brandt Clarke, or maybe even at this point, maybe Drew Doughty would be the 3rd pairing guy, and Spence would be on the 2nd pairing where he's slated to play for the Ottawa Senators. So I would say that would be the big regret for the Kings in terms of the defense that they let get away. Of course, Ken Holland says he has no regrets. He's never made any mistakes. So that's not true. I hope you found that this show entertaining and informative. Gives you something to think about. Do you agree or disagree with what I had to say about these former LA Kings? And once again, thanks to Eben Has Feelings at Eben Has Feelings on X for the idea for today's episode. For you everydayers, those you listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, of course, we have our fan feedback show at the end of the week. You have any comments on any of these former LA Kings, or are any of them are you regretful on more than others as far as players the Kings let get away? Certainly have your chance to chime in on that. The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you're always welcome to post your thoughts if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. We'd love you to stay connected with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. If you want to hear or potentially see more of me, you could check out the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show I've been doing for 20 years plus. And if you want to hear just talk about the NHL in general, you can check that out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Puck Podcast. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.